Gardening can be hard work, and probably like many of you, I don't like to work hard. I'll admit it, I'm a lazy gardener. I try to keep it as simple and easy as possible whenever I come into the garden. So join me today as I share with you how to be a lazy gardener and still have a successful garden. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and as I've built this garden in just the last couple years, I've worked pretty hard getting it set up. Building the beds, the planting, the expanding, all of the plants. That's a lot of work, but that's the kind of work that is a big project in a very short amount of time. On a daily basis, I really don't work that hard. I come out to the garden every day and water and do a few other things, but for the most part, it's easy and it's simple. And that's really the basis of lazy gardening. Doing those big projects, getting everything set up, having a garden plan in place, that you do some hard work up front, but then after that, it's really a piece of cake. In this video, I'll give you 12 things I do that I consider part of being a lazy gardener. The first being not to fight Mother Nature. You have to accept that nature is going to be part of your garden, and if you actually work with nature, things can go much easier. This is a garden arch, and I have a couple grapevines that are going to grow up this arch. And all around me, nature has taken over. I didn't sow any seeds in this area or plant any of these flowers. This is nature at work, so I don't need to work to fight nature. When the grapevines cover this arch, I'll probably have a nice path through here that I'll keep cleared because it'll be a pathway into my little mini orchard and food forest. But for right now, I'm not using this space. So if these flowers, if nature wants to use this space this way, I'm okay with it. I recognize that whatever type of sunflower this is an annual. It will die back in the winter. Next year, if I want this space cleared out, well, I can pluck up the little seedlings when they appear. But for right now, they're not in the way. They're actually benefiting the garden as pollinator plants for everything else I'm growing. So I'm letting them be. I'm letting nature do what it wants in this space, which means no work for me. It's really easy to be lazy when nature helps you out. The second tip is to mulch. Mulch any area where you want to reduce the amount of work that you're doing in your garden, like the area around these trees. I have a very thick layer of wood chip mulch, and there's no weeds at all. I put these trees in about 2 years ago. I put the mulch in shortly thereafter, and I haven't had to do any weed pulling in this entire space in 2 years. Well, how much easier can that be? That really makes it easy to be lazy because I don't have to worry about weeds. Sure, a lot of work to put this mulch in the first place, but zero work after that. I mulch all of my vegetable gardens, of course, for the same reason. It cuts down on the amount of weeding I need to do. Now, this mulch is much thinner than the wood chip mulch, so I still occasionally get a weed, but it's a piece of cake. I just pull it and drop it on the surface. The mulch also helps hold in the moisture in my nice enriched and amended soil. So with mulch, I don't have to weed as often, and I don't have to water as often. It makes it much easier for me. If you have a big garden, or if the garden's a long way from the house, walking back and forth to get your tools and put your tools away gets old pretty fast. It's too hard work. So this is one of those projects to help make me lazier. It's a Mailbox Toolbox, and in here I have tools that I use on a regular basis, like my trowels and hand pruners and some weeding tools for the deeper weeds. These are tools that I can have right on the edge of my garden. When I need them, they're right here. When I'm done with them, they store away very quickly. This makes for easy tool gathering and returning the tools, but I don't always return the tools. If I'm going to be doing a lot of transplanting or have a bigger project and I know that I'm going to be using the same tools the next day, well, I have to admit, I just look at the weather, and if it's not going to rain and it's not going to snow, the lazy gardener in me just leaves the tools out overnight because I will use them the next day. When I'm done with them, I'll put them away. But for a day, maybe even two, leaving your tools outside, it's okay. It's the lazy way to do it. I think every gardener should consider making their own compost. But when you first start making compost, you hear about all the work, the turning and the measuring of the temperature, and doing everything you need to do to keep those thermophilic bacteria happy and give you a hot pile. Well, I'm a lazy composter. This pile right here, which I've started using because it's mostly decomposed, I started over a year ago. I put all the ingredients here and I just let them sit. I didn't do a lot of work. I just let nature decompose the compost. It takes more time than a hot compost pile, but I think I turned this pile once, maybe twice in the course of a year, and that was it. Watering occasionally on very dry days, taking a lazy approach. And I've already started another pile with all of the weeds and the clippings I have in the garden, along with the kitchen waste. Just dump it in that pile. It's going to take time to decompose, but it's no work at all. The next tip is to not worry so much about the bugs in your garden. There are actually going to be more good insects in your garden than bad insects in your garden if you do something like integrated pest management, which is the approach I take to insect control, which is really not a lot of control. Again, I'm letting nature work with me. I've put in this pollinator garden to not only attract the pollinators, but to also attract some of the beneficial predatory insects. Along with the bird houses that I built in my garden, I'm using insects and birds to control the bad bugs in my garden. I'm working with nature, and that's part of the integrated pest management system, is the biological controls that nature provides. I just encourage them to come to my garden to help me out. And as you look at all of these beautiful flowers, we get to the next tip, which is to just let the seeds fall. When you find plants that you like, that look wonderful, and that do great in your garden, well, let the flowers stay on the plants at the end of the season. Let those seeds fall, and they'll help populate the whole area. I didn't put any of these plants in this year. Last year, I did plant some of these perennials, and I let the seeds fall. I have a lot more plants that are in the process of growing and will be flowering later in the season. Using this basic tip, just let plants grow. Especially those of us in a harsh growing environment, if plants like the spot they're in, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with them growing in that spot, especially in an area where I want more flowers, more predatory insects, and more birds to fight the pests in my vegetable garden that's just over there. 2 years ago, I built this series of beds and put in most of these plants, and I really haven't done much since, because the next tip is to grow perennial vegetables and fruits, and that's what this whole area is filled with. I've got rhubarb, and I have some gooseberries and some honeyberries and strawberries in this bed. Right there, I've got asparagus. These are all plants that are going to come back every year, and they require very little maintenance. It takes some time for perennial vegetables and perennial fruits to develop and mature enough that you can harvest them. So get started early on this. I'll have a few berries this year. I think I'm going to have my very first honeyberries, maybe a couple gooseberries. But next year, in the third year, I'm expecting a lot more. And it's at no labor expense at all. These plants just grow. I water them, I mulch them, and that's about it. How much lazier can it be? As you choose the plants for your vegetable garden, it'll be much easier and lazier if you choose the plants that are easy to grow, easy for your area. In this bed, I've got some squash, some beans, some cucumbers, and some Swiss chard. All plants I've grown before, all plants that grow very well in my region, and plants that really don't take much effort at all. In that bed, I've got some eggplant, zucchini, beets, I've got some lettuce, some carrots, and some kale. Again, all plants that do very well here. All I had to do was just sow the seeds and water, and all of these plants have grown. No particular effort on my part. If I was trying to grow a plant that doesn't do well in my area, it means more work. It might mean extra pruning, extra fertilizing, extra attention of all different types. I don't want that. I'm okay growing the same plants in my vegetable garden every year because I know those plants will do well, and I can be lazy about it. And that ties in with the next tip, which is to abandon the plants that just take too much effort. In this bed last week, I transplanted some chard plants. It's been very hot. 3 of the 4 are actually doing pretty well, but the 4th plant needs work. It's struggling. Well, rather than wasting extra time and attention on that plant, it's better to just pull it and put something else in its place. That's the lazy approach. Don't spend extra time on something that's not going to give you the benefits that you want. In my hugelkultur bed behind me, our cold spring temperatures meant that I had to start a little bit later. So the pumpkins and the squashes in that bed are growing slower and later than normal. Right now, I expect some pretty good harvest, but some of the smaller plants in the time that I have left in my short growing season are just not going to reach the point that I'll get the fruit I want. I can leave those plants in place and baby them and give them all of that extra attention, but that's extra work. It's easier just to abandon them. Pull them now before I waste all that time and focus my energy on the plants that are doing well, that will give me the harvest, and that are worthy of my attention. Sometimes a little bit of effort can save a lot of effort later on. So many gardeners wait until the weeds get out of control, and then they have to spend days to get rid of the weeds. Well, I like to just do a little bit every day to avoid a lot of work later on. Like when I water, I'm looking for weeds, and if I happen to find one, I can pull it, maybe pull a couple, and then get back to my watering. If I pull just a few weeds out of each bed every day, eventually there's no more weeds to pull, maybe 1 or 2, but it's a little bit of effort. That way I don't have to spend an entire day weeding all of my beds. That's just way too much work. It's okay to actually do 2 things at the same time: water and weed. What you just saw was a variation of chop and drop, which is a method of pruning, cutting, or weeding where you just drop it on the surface and it becomes mulch. Now, I have my collapsible garden tote, and if I'm doing a lot of pruning, I'll fill this up and take it to the compost pile. But on a daily basis, or if I'm focused on weeding, if I see a weed and I pull it, is it easier to drop it into the tote, fill the tote, go to the compost pile and dump it all out, or just drop it on the surface where it can become extra mulch? And if I do this with 2 or 3 of these grassy little weeds, well, I've just finished weeding this area. Now I don't have to worry about having the tote at all. Chop and drop is the lazy way to deal with some of these tasks. Now when I clean up the garden bed and I want to get rid of some of these plants in the compost pile, sure, I can carry this around and fill it. But even then, these tomato plants, it's easier just to pull and chop off at the ground and carry them as a bundle than to cut them and put them in a tote like this. So I've had this for many years, but I really don't use it as much as you might think. So far I've been talking as though weeds are a bad thing, and it's really only in the vegetable garden that I'm spending any time pulling the weeds, because this next tip for a lazy gardener is to just let the weeds grow. In most cases, the weeds can actually be beneficial for the garden. In this area, I've got some grasses and some flowers, native plants that are growing through this light layer of mulch. I'm okay with that because these native plants are the food for some of my native animals like rabbits. So the rabbits eat the weeds. They're not eating my vegetable garden. These native plants are also attracting some of those beneficial native insects to my garden. And I kind of like the look of some of these weeds as they begin growing. If they interfere with the plants that I'm trying to grow intentionally, sure, they're a weed and they need to go. But in open space, in the areas that I'm trying to populate with more and more plants, why not let the native plants grow? Work with nature again and let nature help me out. I'm interested to find out what tips you might have. If you consider yourself a lazy gardener, share with the rest of us in the comments below those things you do to be lazy successfully. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.